Gee, Silvery, you're cutting it real close to getting this done for Pride Month. We live in a really great era of gaming when it comes to trans representation. Not only do we see trans characters in mainstream titles, but there's no shortage of independent games that capture these intimate personal experiences. But unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. Oh sure, nowadays we can have Rex stare directly at the player and explain the concept of being non-binary. But back in the day, it really felt like trans characters couldn't exist in gaming without some kind of asterisk complicating their identity. Birdo is trans, except only in Super Mario Bros. 2, and it's rarely if ever brought up unless she needs to be misgendered. Vivian is trans, except for the North American localization, and in the other versions, she's constantly misgendered and treated like crap. And then there's Poison, a character that was meant to be cisgendered until the devs decided beating up quote-unquote real women was bad, so they made her trans to justify violence against her.
Dude, is that a hate crime?
More recent depictions of these characters are treated much more respectfully, but their older portrayals still serve to exemplify just how dire trans representation was in gaming before the 2010s. And keep in mind, these are just examples of trans femme characters. When it comes to trans mask characters, what trans mask characters? Hey, wait a second. Rewind that last part. Enhance. That's no tumbleweed. That's beloved fan favorite Pokemon Marill. Marill is an odd case, since it's not even a defined character. Rather, an entire species of Pokemon that's been accepted and celebrated as trans icons. Everything surrounding that reputation is completely unintentional. And yet, in spite of that, it's still a really fascinating example of trans representation. In Generation 3, Marill was given a pre-evolution in the baby Pokemon Azurill. Azurill is a unique Pokemon, both compared to its evolutions and to other baby Pokemon. Before the introduction of the fairy type, Azurill and Marill didn't share a type, and since Marill was already able to breed in Generation 2, a new item was created that would allow Marill to breed Azurill. This item, the Sea Incense, isn't found until Mount Pyre, located between the 6th and 7th gyms. Meanwhile, Marill are abundantly common throughout the Hoenn region. Unless you're going for full Pokédex completion, there's no practical reason to breed for Azurill, and even if you do, there's no practical reason to raise and evolve Azurill when you already need a Marill to obtain it in the first place. I say this because while many people may be familiar with this next fact, I doubt many have actually experienced the phenomena I'm about to explain. Azurill doesn't just have a different type than Marill, it also has a different gender ratio. Each Pokemon species has their own gender ratio, with some being more likely to be female, more likely to be male, exclusively one gender, or having no gender at all. Big shoutouts to Porygon though, my non-binary binary legend. That's a programming joke. Marill is an example of a Pokemon with an even gender ratio. You're just as likely to find a male Marill in the wild as you are to find a female Marill. Pokemon almost always keep their same gender ratio throughout the entire evolutionary line, only deviating from that when one gender is given an exclusive evolution. However, these Pokemon were introduced in later generations. In Generation 3, there existed one Pokemon with a gender ratio that was different from its evolution line. Now take a wild guess who that Pokemon is. The video's about Azurill and Marill, it's obviously them. This difference in gender ratio seems innocuous at first, but due to some technical shenanigans and otherwise underwhelming and especially worthless baby Pokemon, found its stride as a trans mask hero. Let's talk about complex mathematical structures that I only kind of understand. It's time for math, baby! In Pokemon, gender is determined through a Pokemon's personality value, which is an unsigned 32-bit integer that is created when the Pokemon is first generated and sticks with the Pokemon forever, even if it evolves. Specifically, these last 8 digits correspond to the individual Pokemon's gender, and this value is used in relation to the Pokemon species data structure, which is a 28-byte structure that determines all information inherent to a Pokemon species. You keeping up so far? Don't worry, me neither. Each gender ratio has a gender threshold, which is a set number between 0 and 255. For example, a 25% male, 75% female gender ratio like Azuril's has a gender threshold of 191. If an Azuril is generated and the last 8 digits of its personality value are greater than or equal to 191, it will be male. If the value is less than 191, it will be female. Now this is where it gets interesting. Since Marill has an even 50-50 gender ratio, its gender threshold is 127, which is notably lower than Azuril's. This means if an Azuril is born with the last 8 digits of its personality value equal to 127 to 190, it will be female since its value is less than the threshold. But when that same Azuril evolves into Marill, that gender threshold changes to 127, making its value greater than or equal to the threshold. So the once female Azuril will evolve into a male Marill. TLDW, female Azuril have about a 1/3 chance of evolving into a male Marill in Generation 3. I probably could have opened with that, but doesn't it feel good to learn something? This formula for determining gender stayed true through Generation 3 to Generation 5. With Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 being particularly notable as the only games in this group where Azuril can be obtained well before Marill. By Generation 6, this formula was changed and Azuril retained their gender upon evolution. On the one hand, this is kind of lame. I know Marill wasn't intentionally designed to be the trans Pokemon, but it was still a really cool attribute that continues to resonate with a lot of trans Pokemon fans. On the other hand, Pokemon is a series that celebrates its own long history. The thrill of catching, training, and growing attached to these little critters. The series is built around being able to take these favorites to new regions, new adventures, not saying goodbye, but instead saying, "I'll see you in the next game." Because of that Azuril born as a female that transitioned to male upon evolution in Pokemon Emerald, he's still around. Here he is running the Pokeathlon in Johto, becoming a Broadway sensation, a movie star, a social media idol. Here he is enjoying a delicious bowl of curry, and finally standing proudly over the Paldea region. They can change the formula, imply that this was an unintentional coding oversight, but that doesn't matter. Trans Marill existed. Trans Marill exists. Trans Marill will continue to exist. And I think that's really, really cool. Now, despite being the owner of pronouns and an overly complicated gender identity that I'll probably have to explain to my parents after they watch this video, I can't really speak on the trans experience, and especially not the trans mask experience. There's something to be said that one of the only true trans mask characters in gaming before the 2010s only exists because of a coding oversight. But I'm glad that conversation exists. From it, we've gotten great trans characters created with intent, from creators expressing their own experiences. And hey, if people are able to see this beach ball looking mouse and better understand who they truly are, heralding it as a beacon of pride, who is the Pokemon Company, who is Game Freak, and who am I to tell them that's wrong? That all being said, Azumarill is a scourge on the competitive metagame, and in this video I will